wanted to just take a moment to review that last time when we got started with an introduction to the book of Zechariah, we were talking about just an overall impression that we had, and did a little bit of background research into what is a prophet and what is their purpose and who are they often talking to and stuff like that. And I think it was a really great discussion that we had. There was a lot of good insights from everybody, and I really appreciated that. Can I get a thumbs up either on visual or digital if you can see the slides? Excellent, thank you. So this week we're going to begin the study, and I called this, I give it a clever title. This is my alignment message. This is getting in alignment. You know about, for example, if your car is out of alignment, most people aren't mechanics here, but you kind of have an idea about what that is, where your tires are not exactly square to the road. You're familiar with these concepts? And, you know, all kinds of weird things happen to your car if your tires are not towed in correctly and leveled this way and pulled in this way. If it's not just aligned very nicely, boy, all kinds of weird things start happening. You got some vibrations and some shaking, and the parts wear out faster. It's unsafe to turn, unsafe to travel at high speeds. You got all kinds of problems. And that's because your tires are not aligned correctly with the road. And something very similar is true when you are not aligned correctly with your Father in heaven. And if your life is out of alignment with our Father, there will be some shaking. There will be some rumbling. Parts will wear out faster than they should. You will understandably, if you've read through the Bible, you'll understand that you're actually under a curse instead of the blessings if you are not living in obedience to our Father. And the reason I bring this up is because this is the first little bit of instruction that you get from Zechariah immediately after the author is telling us, well, it happened at this time and here's who's writing it. The very next words out of his mouth are some words of correction. And I want to just briefly give you a couple of additional more brief introductory basics that we didn't quite have time to cover last time. Number one is the time frame. I mentioned to you last time that in all of Israelite history, from the beginning, 6,000 years ago, whatever that is, 2,500, 3,500, 4,000 BC until now, well, the end of the New Testament was written in around 90 AD. So if you want to say, aside kicking Job out as one of the earliest books of the Bible, let's say Moses started writing the Torah at around 12 to 1300 BC, and that almost all of the prophets who have a book named after them were written during a very short window of time that was just prior to the Assyrian and Babylonian exiles, and then immediately after the Babylonian exile. So all of these books of prophecy in the Bible are in a very narrow window of time. And this book is taking place about 50 years after the exiles had left Babylon and had come to the Holy Land again to start living there, because the 70 years of exile that was predicted by Jeremiah and Isaiah had come up. And they were allowed to return to the land, and they futzed around there and had some rough times and got a few false starts, and things weren't going very well. And then Ezra is sent down there to get things started about 50 years later. And this is the time period that we're looking at with Zechariah. Nehemiah, I'm not sure if you were aware of this, but Nehemiah arrived in Jerusalem about 100 years later. These guys, Nehemiah and Ezra, were not contemporary. I don't know. I'd have to dig a little deeper to see if their time periods overlap just a little bit. I don't know that they did, though. Nehemiah arose quite a bit later. So the cast of characters, I just want to give you a brief overview of the cast of characters, okay? We've got Zerubbabel, who we'll talk about. We've got Yeshua, Joshua, the high priest. Okay, I think his name is significant. His name is actually Yeshua in the text. It's not Joshua. Haggai is a contemporary prophet with Zechariah. He prophesied they overlapped. And actually, I think Haggai began to prophesy just a couple of months before Zechariah did. And so these are kind of our cast of characters. Zerubbabel, Ezra, Yeshua the high priest, Haggai is there, and Zechariah, our prophet. Okay, so those are your background ideas. And why is this being written to them? Last week, Angela pointed out that the prophets are really, really similar to like when you're getting a spanking from your dad. How he says, I'm warning you, I'm warning you, I'm warning you. And then he finally gives you a spanking. And then he comes into your room while you're rubbing your fists into your eyes and he says, now I want you to understand, I love you and everything's okay and it's going to be all right. You know what I'm saying? So we get that a lot with the prophets. And I want to just remind you that this book is really a great picture of Father coming in after a rather magnificent spanking to say, it's okay. I still love you. Everything's going to be okay. I'm with you. Be strengthened. Be encouraged. Keep plugging away. It's going to be all right. Everything I promised you is still true. So we're going to see that is really the big theme of this book. Now, the first thing I want to do is I want to read with you the first part of Zechariah, which is in Zechariah 1 through 6. Okay, that's what we're going to deal with today, this evening. So here's what we got. I'm going to read this with you now. I'm reading from the NASB version, and you can follow along with me if you like. In the 8th month of the 2nd year of Darius, the word of Yah came to Zechariah the prophet, the son of Berechiah, the son of Iddo, saying, Yah was very angry with your fathers. Therefore say to them, Thus says Yah of hosts, Return to me, declares Yah of hosts, that I may return to you, says Yah of hosts. Do not be like your fathers, to whom the former prophets proclaimed, saying, Thus says Yah of hosts, Return now from your evil ways and from your evil deeds. But they did not listen or give heed to me, declares Yehovah. Your fathers, where are they? And the prophets, do they live forever? But did not my words and my statutes, which I commanded my servants the prophets, overtake your fathers? Then they repented and said, As Yah of hosts purposed to do with us in accordance with our ways and our deeds, so he has dealt with us. Now that is the introductory passage to the prophet Zechariah. And he starts by saying, Yah was very angry with your fathers. Now, I know that you've probably looked up, if you've done any kind of study from, just a couple of months ago, we were doing this study on how to study the Bible, and I'm sure that you probably noticed, you probably want to start digging into some of these words and see what they mean. You ever seen in your Bible where an emphatic word is put in there, but it's put in there twice? And it's sometimes what does that mean to you when you hear the words, two words the same repeated in your Bible? What does that signify to you? Is it like, hey, this is important, pay attention here? Or there might be a double meaning? What do you think of when you see two words of the same exact thing back to back in your Bible? Evan?
Emphasis.
Emphasis, that is, yes, a lot of people think about emphasis. God is really trying to emphasize this. And in verse 2, you can see in the Hebrew text that it says, Katzaf Adonai el avotechem katzef. Notice the two katzef. Now what's interesting is in this passage, they're not back to back. Now you might miss that. Because if you translate that into English, it seems to just say, the Lord was very angry with your fathers. But in the Hebrew, it says, very displeased, Yehovah, with your fathers, displeased. They're not back to back, but they're separated. What might that signify in your mind? Angela, do you want? Yeah, come and get a microphone. Steve, you want to pass that over?
Somebody else have the...
And please, you guys online, feel free to raise your hand or just unmute yourself and start shouting it out. I don't mind at all. Whatever you got is totally fine by me. Angela,
My
go ahead.
guess is that it happens twice, separated by a period of time.
That's a good insight.
This whole idea of cyclical events.
Yeah, that's certainly possible. And I think that some people think of emphasis when they see a Hebrew word repeated twice. It's like, I'm really trying to emphasize that. I think one of the deeper meanings that you see with repeated words in the Torah is it means something different each time. It's trying to emphasize that. Like, remember, justice you shall seek. You remember that phrase from the Torah? And it's not necessarily emphasizing justice. It's saying you must exercise justice in a just way. You know, and when I see angry and then angry, I see a possibility of, like Angela said, a repeat in a cycle of prophecy. But I also potentially see these words not being back to back because this intense anger is tempered by mercy. That it's just an idea that popped into my mind. I have nothing to support that. It's just an idea that occurred to me. That if it was going to be emphasized, very angry, that you might stick them next to each other. But if you separate them by the word your fathers, we know that he loves the fathers, so maybe it's tempered by mercy. But a thing that occurred to me to ask, and you know that's one of the best Bible study methods you can do when you start to read this and you say to yourself, well, I got some questions here. What questions do you have as you read this passage? Anybody can shout it out online or in person, however you like. I'll start in case you're feeling nervous. Which fathers is he talking about? All of them? A particular group of them? And yet, what? I got you started. Now it's your turn, Steve. What other question do you have? I want to know who he's angry with. Who's particularly is he talking about?
Is this after they got back from the exile?
Yes, they are back from the exile.
They're back from the exile.
And he's telling them, Yah was very angry with your fathers. Don't be like them. Yes, why? That's the next good question that I have is why? Steve or Tracy, whoever it is.
So is he referring back to Rehoboam when they were driven out, when he's referring to the fathers, when they were driven out by, when Jeremiah was prophesying?
Yeah.
And the Babylonians came, is he referring back to them because of their idolatry, which is the reason they were driven out?
Yes, absolutely. That's a great question. A great observation. Which fathers in particular? It seems that this started with Rehoboam and Jeroboam when the kingdom split after Solomon died. That's where it started, right there. But that's not to say that it hadn't already been an issue, because when he says, I was angry with your fathers, he's probably talking about everybody, man. He's been hounding the Israelites from the time they left Egypt.
Well, they don't get it.
They don't get it. And I'm so glad you brought that up, Lou. They don't get it. And for so long, that was my opinion. I am going to tell you that I now have a slightly different opinion. Okay. Because I think that is the universal thing that we often feel. They don't get it. What I realized is we just need to change that pronoun slightly. we don't get it. We are still doing the same things. And I'm going to prove that to you with no doubts, okay? It is us. Was there someone else who had a hand raised? Am I missing that?
I was going to ask, what's the
It is
law
Tracy.
first mentioned?
Yes, great. Anger, yeah, that anger word?
Yeah,
Yes, okay, so I'm coming right back to you, Tracy. So katsaf, the first time it is brought up is in Genesis 40, and it says this is when Pharaoh was angry with those two guys that were in prison with Joseph. That's the first mention. The second mention is Pharaoh being angry again with one of his other servants. This is a picture for sure, because it says that Joseph became like a father to Pharaoh, and we know that Pharaoh, in a weird sense, kind of he's only over Joseph in the throne. He gives all authority to Joseph. So that's a picture of the father and the son right there. So it's interesting. Very angry with his servants. Tracy, sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. I was just thinking about, I know I've said this before, but when we read that passage, Messiah says, why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye when there's a plank in your own eye? That we need to apply that to how we read the scriptures.
Yeah.
When we look back at the mistakes they made, like, I can't believe they're so stupid. I can't believe they did that, when we're doing the same thing.
Yes.
And we just aren't realizing it.
Yes.
And then also remembering how Daniel prayed in Daniel chapter 9, that he didn't say they, he said we, and we need to have that same mind.
Yes, Daniel was French, and he did often say oui.
I heard it when I said
it. No, but you're absolutely right, and that is, I was always instructed by that prayer of both Daniel and Nehemiah. Daniel 9 and Nehemiah 9 are fantastic prayers that talk about, really acknowledging that it was your fathers, but it's also you. And it's interesting that they are begging for forgiveness for their own generation and for their fathers. Forgive us for the sins that we've been committing all along, and that includes us. And now, I would say, Yah has been trying to correct these people since way back. Way back. I mean, we had Rachel stealing her father's idols when he left Laban's house. We've got lots of problems in this family going way back, and we still got them today. And Tracy's absolutely right, that we are often looking at the knuckleheads in the Old Testament going, gosh, why didn't they get it? Why are they doing this? In that you do that, you condemn yourself, for sure. And I'm going to point that out to you, and something that occurred to me, which was just fascinating, but it really bothered me. And I got to tell you that as I began to look deeper into this, I began to get more and more perturbed in my spirit, frankly. And I began to become a little bit frightened, because I began to very clearly recognize we are no different, not a lick. And that made me a little concerned. But undoubtedly, Yah was angry with all of the fathers, but most especially it seems that when you start to read the Chronicles and the Kings that happened after David and Solomon, it appears to get really bad. Lots of idolatry and paganism being grafted into the nation, and lots of stupid stuff happening. But something that was interesting is, lots of bad things have happened. Yah's been correcting his people for a long time. And finally, all 12 tribes are purged from that land. They're vomited right out of that place. Over a period of 135 years, first the 10 northern tribes get taken captive by Assyria and banished from the land. And then 135 years later, Judah banished from the land, along with Levi and Benjamin and a little bit of Shimon. Everybody's gone for 70 years, and now they're coming back. And the question was, why was he angry with them? And I know that there are perceptions in our mind as we, well, if you had to guess, maybe you don't even have to guess, you've read these passages enough to where you can think in your mind, why? What were they doing? What does your mind tell you? Just your memory. what do you know about the history of this nation and the things that they've been doing? I mean, you don't need to rattle off, but is there like 5 big ones or something? I mean, what's the real issue here? What would you say, Stephen?
Well, again, I think it comes back to idolatry.
Idolatry, sure.
Yeah, that would be the core issue. I think that's kind of the root of everything else that they led to do, like sexual sins and everything else was rooted in idolatry.
Yeah.
That's what I would say.
Yeah, that's a great call for sure. And you do hear that a lot. Tracy?
They were not judging righteously with their brethren, and I think I'm gonna say Isaiah 5 when he tells the parable of this vineyard and says, "I came looking for good fruit, but they were producing rotten fruit." But when you look in the Hebrew, it says that he was looking for judgment and they were producing oppression. I was looking for righteousness and they were producing I heard a cry for help. So this is all about judging unrighteously and how we treat other people. So the whole love your neighbor as yourself, love the Lord your God thing was not working with the religious leaders.
Yeah, absolutely right. And that is right on. I think a lot of us have a perception when we think back just through our memories and we don't do a careful search. And I'm going to do a careful search with you in here in just a second to see what actually the problem is. Because I think in our minds, we often think, well, there's a bunch of persistent, pernicious sin, but especially idolatry, sexual sin, hypocrisy, and religiosity, if you want to put it that way. But Tracy is absolutely right that the greatest issue seems to be how we're treating each other. That's the thing. He's angry about a lot of different things, but he seems to be most angry about injustice. And this is what got me thinking. So I started to look around, and I want to share with you some things that I found. Look with me in Ezekiel chapter 16. I want to share with you Ezekiel chapter 16. Ezekiel chapter 16 verses 46 through 49 seems to provide a fairly brief but interesting overview of how Father saw these issues. And this is being spoken of Jerusalem. It says, "Now your older sister is Samaria, who lives north of you with her daughters, and your younger sister who lives south of you is Sodom with her daughters." These are obviously metaphors. "Yet you have not merely walked in their ways or done according to their abominations, but as if that were too little, you acted more corruptly in all your conduct than they. As I live, declares Yah Elohim, Sodom, your sister, and her daughters have not done as you and your daughters have done. Behold, this was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had arrogance, abundant food, and careless ease. But she did not help the poor and the needy." Now, he does talk about an abomination, but specifics, when we get down to specifics, he's talking about arrogance, abundant food, careless ease, and stomping on the poor and the needy. This is Yah's own summary of the problem to the prophet Ezekiel. Lou?
Well, I was just thinking, and they weren't thankful for all the things that God gave him. I mean, it says this, but it was just, they became arrogant. He's going to take care of us, and you have to take care of yourself.
Yeah. I'm glad you put it that way, too. That's a good insight. Stephen?
I just wanted to point out, too, that in Deuteronomy chapter 31, and I'm sure you're familiar with this, Moses kind of predicted that they would do this. Deuteronomy 31, starting in verse 15. The Lord said to Moses, "Behold, you will rest with your fathers, and this people will rise and play the harlot with God of the foreign land, where they go to be among. And they will forsake me and break my covenant which I have made with them. Then my anger shall be aroused against them in that day, and I will forsake them, and I will hide my face from them, and they shall be devoured. And many evils and troubles shall befall them, so that they will say in that day, have not these evils come upon us because our God is not among us? And I will surely hide my face in that day because of all the evils which they have done, and that they have turned to other gods. Yeah. And he goes on and on in Deuteronomy 31, predicting kind of this was going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Good insight. Good insight. Now, this is just one of the overviews. Now, let me share a different one with you, okay? This one, Ezekiel was one of the earlier prophets. Hosea and Isaiah and Jeremiah were probably a little bit before Ezekiel. Ezekiel was actually one of the exiles from Judah who was taken away to Babylon. But if you look at the book of Malachi, who, as far as we know, is one of the last Hebrew prophets of the Bible, looking at Malachi chapter 3, verse 7, we have another little overview of what Yah sees as the problem. So in Malachi 3 and 7, he says something really, really similar to what Zechariah has just said, but he gives us a little more details. Listen to what he says in Malachi 3 and 7. From the days of your fathers you have turned aside from my statutes and have not kept them. Return to me, and I will return to you, says Yah of hosts. But you say, how shall we return? You have robbed Elohim. Will a man rob Elohim? Yet you are robbing me. But you say, how have we robbed you? In tithes and offerings. You are cursed with a curse, for you are robbing me, the whole nation of you. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, so that there may be food in my house. And test me now in this, says Yah of hosts, if I will not open for you the windows of heaven and pour out for you a blessing until it overflows. Then I will rebuke the devourer for you, so that it may not destroy the fruits of the ground, nor will your vine in the field cast its grapes, says Yah of hosts. Now, this might trip you up here if you're thinking for just a moment to yourself, well, Father seems to be real upset about tithes. Is that what's concerning him? Because we're not giving enough money to the church? Is that what he's talking about here?
No, he's talking about them not showing generosity toward the poor, I think.
I think you're absolutely right, okay, because we got to have tithes and offerings given to the temple, or we can't even take care of the priests, first of all.
Right.
And then the priests can't distribute that tithe to the poor and the widow and the orphan and the alien and the sojourner. This is all tied to the same thing. Tracy?
Yeah, this is Ella. I switched rooms, so now I'm talking on my mom's phone.
Okay.
Anyway, it reminded me of Eli's sons who were, I think it was like evil, doing evil things in God's eyes, and they despised the God's sacrificial system. My brain's not working right now.
Yes,
and they,
absolutely.
Before they gave to God, they were taking the first and best for themselves, the fat, instead of giving it to God. Right. So that's kind of like robbing him in sacrifices.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm glad that you brought that up, because I want to tie that in just a little bit, because I think you mentioned Hophni and Phinehas, Eli's sons, who were being unrighteous in their religious service, if you want to call it that. Yah apparently is very, very serious about the religious service, but maybe not in the way that we're thinking. And I want to deal with that in just a moment. Stephen, go for it.
I just wanted to, and this could be a sidebar issue we can come back to later, Alan, but I just wanted to know your thoughts on verse, and I need my glasses, verse 3, where he says, return to me, says the Lord of hosts, and I will return to you. Yeah. I just wanted to know your thoughts about that being somewhat of a conditional statement.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I think that is you know what, Stephen, that's a great question, and I think that we will loop back around to that, because that's going to play right into where I'm going next. But I'm glad you brought that up, because I think it'll help us to frame the context of what we're talking about, so that we understand, once we look at these problems, what does that mean for us? How do we return? What is he requesting us to do? And what does that look like? Is that a conditional statement? I will go ahead and tell you, yes, absolutely, it is a conditional statement. Did someone else raise their hand, or am I good to go? Okay. Now, that gives us a little bit of flavor. Oh, Angela, were you going to? Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Angela.
Well, not if it's going to interfere
No,
with where you're headed.
No, not at all. You go right
the
ahead.
Ananias thing.
Yes, please. That's a great place to bring that up.
Because of what Tracy or Ella just brought up, the thing with Eli's sons taking from the offering. The fat was supposed to be for God, right?
Yeah.
No one else was supposed to get the fat. And then you have, when you and I were discussing this earlier this week, that the idea of Ananias and Sapphira came up, and how seriously he takes it. And I always looked at that story and thought, wow, that was really severe to do. They were giving, they just weren't giving it all. Really? What's your problem there? Yeah. The problem, I think, and what's becoming clearer and clearer as we look at this and Eli's sons and this thing about robbing God of the tithes, which are for the oppressed, it's this idea of the robbing God is to take a piece of it and use it as a way to make yourself look more righteous in the eyes of your compatriots, or to wield power, or to glutton, like feed your own appetite, is so. I think that is so abhorrent. Yeah. That you would do that, because what you're doing there is you're oppressing, you're stealing, and it's all to feed your own appetite for, whether it's your literal belly, or your appetite for power, or your appetite for ego, accolades, for being all righteous. And it just goes back to the same problem Yeshua had with the Pharisees, was you're lengthening your tzitzit, and you're just doing this stuff. And clearly from what happened to Ananias and Sapphira and to Eli's sons, this is a huge issue. And I think it would be good for us to umbrella that and look at what is the bigger issue there, and to ask ourselves, like you started out this whole conversation, how are we doing that? Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought that up, because we're coming right to that, okay? Now, and to come around at this from a slightly different angle, I want to ask your opinion about something. When you think about the Babylonian exile, you had the whole population of Jerusalem and Judea kicked out of the land, and they go to Babylon. All of them. That had to have been a couple of million people, I don't know. Good number. And we also know, because you can count from the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, how many came back to the land? Not many. 10,000, 20,000, 50,000. It's not that much. It's a small fraction. Now, why is that? Well, it's easy to see. You can see it, frankly, in the Jews around the world today. Life is good in Babylon. Life is good in America. I've got financial security. I've got my family here. Everything's been going okay. Do I want to move to the Holy Land and fight with my neighbors and have to put up with that kind of stuff? I'd rather just stay where I am. It's the same thing. Now, I'm not telling you should move to Israel. That's not, Messiah is going to take me to Israel. But the issue here is most of the people just stayed in Babylon. We've been here 70 years. The Babylonians are actually kind of nice to us. They've given us jobs. They don't treat us too badly. We're hanging in there. So we're staying. Now, when I think about these returning exiles, for a long time, until just this week, I thought to myself, how would you characterize these exiles? Would you say they're decent people? Would you say they're holy and righteous people? Would you say that they've got to be really extremely zealous? Or why would they leave and go back to the Holy Land?
That was my perception, is that these are the go-getters. But when you read the remarks, you can see remarks from this book in chapter 7. Chapter 7, he's talking to them about themselves. In Nehemiah, he's talking to them about themselves. In Ezra 9, he's talking to them about themselves. In Haggai, he's talking to them about themselves. And you get a real clear picture of what these people are like. And it blew my perception of them right out of the water. Let's take a look at that. Here is what I want to share with you. The first one is from, so the question that we want to answer is, have these people turned back to him? To some degree, yes, they have. But to what degree? Is it enough? Is he happy? Is he pleased with it? From what we're about to read, I'd say the answer is unequivocally no. Take a look at this. This is in Nehemiah chapter 5. Okay, I'm going to read this little passage to you from Nehemiah chapter 5, verses 1 through 15.
I'm sorry, you said Nehemiah? Is that one of the Apocrypha books?
No, Nehemiah is... Nehemiah. Sorry, I'm just pronouncing it slightly different.
Oh, okay.
Nehemiah, yes. Most people say Nehemiah. I say Nehemiah. Sorry.
Gotcha.
Yeah, sorry. Nehemiah chapter 5, verse, what is Apocrypha? That's a good question.
I was kind of looking at that.
Yeah, sorry. Nehemiah. Woo! Crazy, sorry. It says here, now there was a great outcry of the people and of their wives against their Jewish brothers, for there were those who said, we, our sons and our daughters, are many, therefore let us get grain that we may eat and live. And there were others who said, we are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our houses that we may get grain because of the famine. Also, there were those who said, we have borrowed money for the king's tax on our fields and our vineyards. And now our flesh is like the flesh of our brothers, our children like their children. Yet behold, we are forcing our sons and our daughters to be slaves, and some of our daughters are forced into bondage already. And we are helpless because our fields and vineyards belong to others. And then I was very angry when I had heard their outcry in these words. And I consulted with myself, and I contended with the nobles and with the rulers, and I said to them, you are exacting usury, each from your brother. Therefore I held a great assembly against them. And I said to them, we, according to our ability, have redeemed our Jewish brothers who were sold to the nations. Now would you even sell your brothers that they may be sold to us? Then they were silent and could not find a word to say. Again I said, the thing which you are doing is not good. Should you not walk in the fear of our Elohim because of the reproach of the nations, our enemies? And likewise, I and my brothers and my servants are lending them money and grain. Please let us leave off this charging of interest for loans to our brothers. Please give back to them this very day their fields, their vineyards, their olive groves, and their houses. Also the 100th part of the money and of the grain, the new wine and the oil that you were exacting from them. Then they said, we will give it back and will require nothing from them. We will do exactly as you say. So I called the priests and I took an oath from them that they would do according to this promise. I also shook out the front of my garment and said, thus may Elohim shake out every man from his house and from his possession who does not fulfill this promise. Even thus may he be shaken out and emptied. And all the assembly said, Amen. And they praised Yah. Then the people did according to this promise. So you've got oppression of the poor among the returning exiles. You've got oppression of the poor among the returning exiles. I was a little surprised by that. You've got some wealthy people among them. You got some poor and lowly among them, and they're loaning them money at interest to the point where they're so poor they can't hardly feed themselves, and their brothers are charging them interest. This is oppression of the poor and the needy. Now that's part one. Now look at part two. This is from Ezra. Ezra 9 and 1. We're getting a little bit clearer picture about who are these exiles and how they're dealing with this. Now when these things had been completed, the princes approached me saying, The people of Israel and the priests and the Levites have not separated themselves from the peoples of the lands, according to their abominations. Those are the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Egyptians, and the Amorites. For they have taken some of their daughters as wives for themselves and for their sons, so that the holy race has intermingled with the peoples of the lands. Indeed, the hands of the princes and the rulers have been foremost in this unfaithfulness. You probably have read this before, where this is a big issue. These people are intermarrying with full-on pagans. Now, you might not have you probably have a real clear understanding of the problem there. I mean, if you marry your son off to some pagan woman, there's a real good chance that she's going to influence the raising of the children, and there are going to be some intermingling of the religious practices and all kinds of weird stuff. You bring one of these young women into your house to marry one of your sons. You send one of your daughters into their house to marry one of their sons. It mingles and mixes, and Father does not like mingling and mixing. He's one of these guys who separates his food on his plate. You don't mix that stuff together. So there's one of your issues of being influenced by the culture around them and being fully willing to integrate with them. That's a bad deal right there. Lou, get that microphone.
Well, is this not a teaching? Well, I don't know how to say this. Well, it's just, I guess, an example that when I met your Aunt June, one of the first things that we said, do you believe in God, and do you believe in God? Mm-hmm. So a non-believer and a believer have a hard time.
Well, yeah, that's just unequally yoked and all that stuff.
Yes.
You're going to have some serious problems.
Yep.
You're going to have some serious problems for sure. So yeah, absolutely, absolutely serious.
I think it goes a step further.
Tell us, yes, give it to
It's
him.
got to be people that are in the Torah.
Yeah.
Because
Well, yeah, imagine what that might be like if you're a Torah observant Christian and you marry a woman who's not Torah observant.
Yeah.
That's not going to end well.
Yeah.
And I've seen it repeatedly in our own, not in our own congregation immediately, but no, that's not true. I have seen it in our own congregation, and I've talked to many people around the country who the husband is a Torah observant Christian and the wife is not.
Right.
Almost every single time they're divorcing.
Yeah.
Now, I have always counseled people, do not do that. If at all possible, we are to live at peace. We believe in the same God. I know that you might disagree with that, but I don't agree that we have different perspectives, and I know that one is right and one is wrong, but we are to live in peace, and that we can get along. But that we get so bound up in our religious expression and our understanding of things, and this is coming right to the point that we're going to talk about in a minute, that we're destroying relationships, and that is not called for. But it's really, really hard to do. Did you want to say something?
Not just the relationships, but the children, and those are the vulnerable.
Yeah,
They're
the
being
children,
destroyed by
yeah.
that
Yeah, that's destroying the children's, it's destroying everything. It's not good. And I know that that's a tough, tough call. It really is. I can't even imagine what I would do in that situation. And it's really, really hard to make that work out. But, it's happening to families who were, they were just normal Christians when they started out. And one of them gets this Torah observant bug and, Hebrew roots thing. And all of a sudden, things are going sideways, man. Yeah. It doesn't go well from there, for sure. That's a tough situation. But I wouldn't go so far as to say that that's light and darkness mixing. I know that you might have a different perspective on that. I think they're of the same spirit, but they have different perspective. And I think that's a tough one to iron out for sure. But I want to continue with looking at Haggai, because Haggai gives us a very interesting insight. And right at the beginning of the book of Haggai, you get some more insight into some of the issues that these people were dealing with. And if you look at Haggai right at the beginning, it says this: in the 2nd year of Darius the king, on the 1st day of the 6th month, the word of Yah came to the prophet Haggai to Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, the governor of Judea, and to Yehoshua or Joshua or Yeshua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest, saying, thus says Yah of hosts, this people says, the time has not come even for the building of the house, for the time for the house of Yah to be rebuilt. Then the word of Yah came to Haggai the prophet, saying, is it time for you yourselves to dwell in your paneled houses while this house lies desolate? Now therefore, thus says Yah of hosts, consider your ways. You have sown much, but harvest little. You eat, but there is not enough to be satisfied. You drink, but there is not enough to become drunk. You put on clothing, but no one is warm enough. And he who earns wages to put into a purse with holes in it. Thus says Yah of hosts, consider your ways. Go up to the mountains, bring wood, and rebuild the temple, that I may be pleased with it and be glorified, says Yah. You look for much, but behold, it comes to little. When you bring it home, I blow it away. Why? Declares Yah of hosts. Because of my house which lies desolate, while each of you runs to his own house. Therefore, because of you, the sky has withheld its dew, and the earth has withheld its produce. And I called for a drought on the land, on the mountains, on the grain, on the new wine, on the oil, and what the ground produces, on men, on cattle, and on all the labor of your hands. Now, this was a challenging passage for me, because I began to think, is Yah really concerned about the temple? He seems to be really concerned about the temple. Why do you think that matters? What do you think is going on here?
There's got to be structure, and there's got to be teachers, and there's got to be a community. And if you don't have that community, you can't demonstrate his love. So structure has to be there. And the temple is where everybody goes, especially on the feast days.
I think that's a great insight, and I think what he is pointing out, and just like you said, there's no community. They're doing their own thing.
Doing what's right in their own eyes.
Hold on, Luke. Tracy? Hold that thought.
If we're maybe perhaps look at this spiritually, we know that Messiah is building the temple, the spiritual temple. And one verse and that you just read that I really like is when he says, come up to the mountain and bring wood. And that's what Messiah said, pick up your cross and follow me.
Yeah.
So he's telling you, help me build this temple. And it's a spiritual temple that we're supposed to be, metaphorically building, at least according to Spirit, if that's how I read that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good insight.
Physical and spiritual.
Yes, and we need to consider this both spiritually and temporally.
I think everybody's working on the spiritual, but what's really lacking is a community.
That's
I mean,
very
for me, that's
very
obvious.
good, very
I
good
don't
insight. And we're going to talk about that in just a sec. Go ahead, Lou.
Well, they started building the foundation of the temple. And the Samaritans and neighbors around him didn't want that because they didn't want them to come together.
Right. They were trying to prevent
They
that
had
community.
a weapon in one hand and a shovel
That's
in
right.
the other.
Right.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
And
So-
that's what we got nowadays. I mean,
Yeah.
if we want to build it, we're going to come against some serious resistance.
You bet we are. You're absolutely right. So I had to ask myself some questions, okay? I look at these returning exiles and I see a spiritual picture of us. I personally think that the Hebrew Roots movement, the Torah observant movement, is a people who is probably taking the Bible and their relationship with God more seriously than most people I know. I know Christians who are very on fire for the Lord, but not as zealous to a large degree as this Torah observant Hebrew Roots Christianity. However, I have to look at these people who I had assumed were zealous and righteous and doing the right things and trying to get this thing going, and then compare it to us and figure out where are the similarities? What's the connection? And unfortunately, I believe that there are strong connections here, that we're trying to move in the right direction, But unfortunately, to a degree, I see a lot of external things. A lot of external things and a real lack of building a community. Why do you think, and this was interesting because it's how long have I been pushing, poking, prodding to you guys, people online, let's build this community. Let's truly get to know each other. Let's hold each other accountable. Let's build those relationships that are tighter and easier to get to know each other. This online community that we're trying to build, the Discord server, trying to put together men's fellowships, women's fellowships, trying to build a community. Because without that, you got a bunch of people who are individual little units that are not functioning as a body. And I think that if you want to spiritualize what you're hearing from Haggai, Yah is concerned about the building of his body. Not the temple is important, but I think that Tracy and Brett really put their finger on that and said that temple is a community. It's the heart and the basis of that community. And to the degree that you are not fostering that community, and especially this goes back to what we were talking about in Nehemiah, Ezra, and Haggai, as well as Ezekiel and Malachi, are you taking care of each other? Are you truly taking care of each other? What is your spiritual sacrifice? Is it tithes and offerings? We don't collect tithes and offerings in this fellowship. We've got a spot on our website that says, we have a spot on our website that's like a donation page, and it literally says on there, do not give money to this organization. This is only to raise money for the feast days for the local congregation. We do not want your money under no way, shape, or form. But what we do want is community. What we do want is people to love each other, to look out for each other, to pray for one another, to support each other, encourage each other, correct each other, get that community going. Angela, speak.
Well, this is kind of that conversation we had earlier in the week, and I'll try to explain that.
Please do.
When they're investing their...
Wait, I apologize. I want you to gather your thoughts for just a second because I
Okay.
forgot that Stephen had his hand raised.
Yeah, that's fine.
Gather your thoughts. Stephen, go, boy.
Oh, no, she can go ahead, Alan.
No,
I
that's
can wait.
okay. It was not. It's unrighteous. You had your hand up first.
I'm trying to build community. Look out not for your own interests, but the interests of others. So she can go ahead.
Okay. Well, she's about to launch, buddy, and I don't want you to
Yeah.
forget what you're going to say.
Yeah. Go ahead. She can go ahead. That's
All right.
fine.
Go ahead, Angela.
Okay, you had them there building their own paneled houses instead of investing in his house, and that shows their priorities, that they're investing in their own stuff and not his, and his is to build the body, like Tracy said, which is the community. The body is the community, the whole collective, right?
Yes.
And so
So what are we withholding then? How would you characterize that? What are we withholding from each other if it's not money or something?
well, don't ask. I wasn't ready to answer that question. I had something else to say.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
This-
Not you, her.
this-
I'm coming
okay,
back to you, Brett.
Hold on, I'll finish.
Didn't have an answer.
Oh,
To
okay.
his question, he just that when they're doing this, he talks about how they put on clothes but they're not warm, and they put money in their pockets but they have holes in them, and I think that when we talked about this earlier in the week, there was this impression that they just can't get enough. But we talked a little bit more about it this morning, and I think it's that they perceive that they can't get enough because they do have clothes and they do have money, but they never perceive that it's enough because they're feeding their own selfish appetites and desires. And it's when you invest in serving others and the community that you're actually satiated. And I think that might be there. So
No, I think
go,
that's.
Brett.
Okay.
Give him a microphone.
Here.
Get that microphone, Brett.
Hophni and Pincus, and you're right. They were doing selfish deeds. They're laying with the woman who came with the offerings, wives. They're doing horrible things. So it pleased Yah. The only time I see where he was pleased to destroy them. And wrath is poured out also on the sons of Aaron when they did things wrong, when they brought the incense. So there's absolute fear and trembling when you get close to Yah, because you know the closer you get, the more that wrath is poured out.
Sure.
So what are organizations with the Ruach doing right now? Like, what's United in Yah? What's Living Messiah? What are the assemblies doing? They're buying land. They're setting aside. They're organizing amongst themselves. I mean, I hope you all are involved in some community, because we see stuff coming up.
Here's the problem. Okay, and you hit on it earlier, is that we're all a bunch of loners. Most of us in this movement are a bunch of independent thinkers who don't want other people telling us what to do, and we're all going to just vacate society. We are supposed to serve. And I think that we are running up against our own nature here, our own inclinations, our own urges to do things a certain way. And I hate to say it like that, but we need to challenge ourselves to think about this differently, because we all would rather just crawl in a hole and not have to deal with people. I know
Well,
that.
I've said that for years, and it's absolutely the truth that people are very challenging to deal with. But if you don't deal with them, you don't have a family. Right. Jacqueline.
I was going to say, when you ask about who are the people who came back from Babylon, and I was thinking most likely the people who came back from Babylon were the troublemakers, the people who weren't really satisfied because nothing was right. And I thought that is probably a lot of the people who are into the Torah community now, because we're the people who aren't satisfied.
Yes,
and we keep thinking
absolutely.
something else has to be different. And as Angela was speaking, I was thinking that's exactly.
Yes, that's a great insight. And like Angela just mentioned, like the American colonists, the Wild West. Yeah, absolutely. Stephen, did you remember what you wanted to say, brother?
Barely. I was just really going to speak to what you mentioned earlier about what differentiates. Jacqueline just spoke to this as well. The serious believers from the not so serious and those who came back. And I was just pointing out that I think that's kind of what we see in Zechariah there, based on what you said, it's kind of a microcosm of what separates, like you said, the Hebrew roots followers versus the nominal Christian, right? Meaning that there's a level of dissatisfaction in the Hebrew roots follower based on what they've experienced through nominal Christianity, going by what their pastor tells them, or the pagan holidays, or whatever it may be. So I just wanted to point out that maybe that's kind of a microcosm of kind of where we are today, in the sense that the Hebrew roots follower is going to be, like you said, more serious, pushing more toward God. So anyway, that's pretty much what I was going to say.
Yeah, and I think that's a great insight, Stephen, and I appreciate you saying that. My fear is, here's something that I'm jumping ahead just slightly, and we'll deal with this when we get there. But you notice something very, very interesting when you look in the book of Zechariah chapter 7. You see these exiles going to the prophet, and what are they asking him? Does anybody know this off the top of their heads? I don't have this right in front of me, but I'll go ahead and summarize it for you. Hey, what we really want to know about is, we've been fasting on this day and this day. Should we continue to do that? What are they concerned about? They're concerned about themselves and their religious expression. Is that instructive to you? Hey, I have if God showed up right now, us Hebrew roots people would say, you know what, I got some great questions for you. Is it the conjunction, or is it the sliver? Hey man, are we counting these days right? How long should my tzitzit be? How do I observe the Shabbat better? Do you see what I'm saying? These guys are asking the prophet Zechariah in chapter 7 the exact same types of questions. And you know what? His answer is very instructive. What do I care about your stupid religious observance that you're making up for yourself? That is not my concern. I have zero interest in your feast, your fast days, and the way you're doing things. Now, please don't hang up on me right now and think that I'm telling you that all this Hebrew root stuff is garbage. I am not saying that. What I am saying is we're getting so wrapped up, a lot of us, on the milk of the word, the basis, the real basic stuff, that we're forgetting the spiritual aspects. We're so wrapped up in how do I do this and how making sure I don't do that. We're becoming Pharisees, you guys. We're becoming very religious. I know that some of you are going to freak out and say that I am an apostate, and that's okay. I'm really okay with that. I see it a lot. If you're listening to other preachers online who are Hebrew roots people, they're seeing it too. And they're talking about it a lot. We've got a lot of very religious people who are really concerned about the commandments. And don't think that I'm not saying that the commandments are important. They are critical. But once you've got those bases down, you got to think about, what am I going to give? What does he want from you? Yeah. Everything. He wants you.
Right.
He doesn't want your
Don't
money.
do it
Yeah, he's not concerned about your money. Does he want you to have tzitzit? Yes, he does. Does he want you to observe the Torah? Yes, he does. Let's get past that now. What does he want from you? He wants you. All of you, every little bit of it. Going to Tracy and then Angela.
Yeah, I mean, we will be standing before him when he's separating the sheep from the goats, and he's not saying, well, you did a good job with those feast days and keeping them correctly, and you wore your seat every day, and I'm proud of you for that. It was, how did you treat my brethren?
Yes.
Because that's how we're supposed to be treating him.
Yes.
And then the parable of the Samaritan is like, these law keepers, that are trying to do it right, were the ones walking by the poor dead guy.
Yes.
So we have to put life first.
Yes, and I think what Angela had pointed out a moment ago, I'm coming back to you, Stephen, is it's you. If you're not giving of yourself, it is really irritating to make yourself available. It's a real commitment to make yourself available. And my wife always told me, and God bless her, she's a really wise woman. She was often like, yeah, you don't have to necessarily give money. You don't necessarily have to give this. You don't necessarily, you've got to make yourself available to people, because it's real simple to let people know, I'm here, but I'm not really available. Don't call me.
I'll pray for you.
I'll pray for you, or something like that. You see what I'm saying? It's real subtle. And this is what happens when you start talking about spiritual things. It's hard to put your finger on it, but you know what's wrong. And I don't hear me kicking you too badly, because that's what most people will do and that's me. I'm a literalist. I'm looking at the Torah commandments and I'm thinking, I can do that. That's easy for me to understand. I can grasp it. I can touch it. I can, you know what I'm saying? It's simple for me to understand and grasp. But when you start talking to me about giving of myself, making myself available, putting others' needs ahead of my own, that's nebulous. And I don't know exactly what to do with that. It's so much easier for me to just observe the Shabbat. Can't I just do that? That's just so much easier. Can't I just grow my hair long and wear some tzitzit and stop eating pork? That's just so simple. I can do that. You start telling me to give of myself, and it's like we're talking nebulous things that are spiritually discerned, and harder to come across. Who's speaking? Is it Angela or is it Stephen?
I was just going to say, you are 100% correct, Alan. But we have to remember, well, not really, but we have to remember, but what's the flip side of that coin? You can go so far with love that you throw out the command.
Yes.
And you start to lower your standards and you accept anything. It reminds me of Matthew chapter 23, verse 23, where Jesus was rebuking these Pharisees, like you said. He says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and you neglect the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faith.
Yep. These
you ought to have done without leaving the others undone. Blind guides, you strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. So Jesus is saying, listen, don't do all these laws in the absence of love, right?
Right.
Is what he's saying.
Yeah.
So I just kind of wanted to point out that could go the other way as well, right?
Yes.
Where we throw out God's commands
Yep.
for the sake of loving people, quote unquote.
Yeah. And you know what? Yeah, that's very, very, very unbalanced.
But
Angela?
if you understand the commands, that is loving other people. If you think that having to throw out the command, you have to throw out the commands to be extra nice to people, you don't understand the commands. Right. And because those define what love of humankind is. Right. And in Zechariah 7, after they ask their questions about the religious details, he says, this is what I want. Dispense true justice, practice kindness and compassion each to his brother. Do not oppress the widow, the orphan, the stranger, the poor, and do not devise evil in your hearts against one another. That's what he's looking for. And the commands tell you how to do that.
Mm-hmm. That is all summed up in you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Now the Torah is giving us how to do that, but it's all pointing in that direction. But we seem to get wrapped up in the logistics, the details, without seeing the big picture. Angela, give that to Lou for me.
No, I walk every day. I go get the mail, and I have to walk to get it to the next block. And I walk by this bumper sticker on the car that says, "I love cats, so I can't stand people."
Yes, absolutely. Yes, that is. People are tough.
I mean, that's what, you know.
Yeah, you can't really have fellowship without getting your hands dirty. And if you've been involved in our fellowship for any length of time, it's tragic to see that once we're so uncomfortable with getting to know each other and actually poking underneath the hood. Now, I don't mean, go around like a person who's inspecting underneath everybody's hood, but what I am saying is some people are real uncomfortable with that. You all of a sudden, you let up your hood on accident and somebody sees in there, it's like, whoa, I'm out of here. I'm going to a new fellowship because you've just discovered who I truly am. That is bad. That's bad. It's tough. But I don't care who you are. I don't care what you've done. I don't care what kind of problems you have. What I care about is, can we help each other? Can I encourage you?
How do we keep that balance, Alan? Because the contemporary church today used to be a lot more conservative, but if you look at the majority of their mission statements today, they've seemed to set aside their conservativeness for the sake of loving people, right? That's always the excuse. So you get on this slippery slope over time.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
It's not true love.
So how would you say we should balance that?
True love.
I think that what I think really, Stephen, is what's most important is that we mix love with truth. We have to say, come as you are. Because the church has said, come as you are. But what they have kind of left the door open to is, it's okay if you stay that way. Come in, just everybody come in. We want to be loving and inclusive and all this other stuff, but it's not that important. We've let the standards go. We've said, hey, come in and just stay a while, and maybe this will rub off on you. That's fine as far as it goes, but we've thrown the standards right out the window. Instead of saying come in, but you can't wear that shirt. You're making a spectacle of yourself. Come in, but you can't come in with your same-sex partner. You're making a mockery of what we believe. You see what I'm saying? We've been so inclusive. If you leave your mind open, people will throw garbage in it. So we have lost the balance of having some rules in place, and we've forgotten what the whole teaching of Acts chapter 15 is. Hey man, get together in fellowship. But here are 4 things that will immediately exclude you from fellowship. If you're involved in sexual immorality and eating weird, unclean things, strangled meats and sexual immorality and worshiping idols, you will be immediately kicked out of fellowship. Period. We've forgotten that. We need a biblical faith. That's what we need. I hope that answers your question, Stephen. Go ahead.
Well, I have been trying to help the church I go to that, and there's some people that would like to have marriage counseling. I'm not a marriage counselor, but I've been trying to help other people. And one of the things that in my studies is that, well, I do it to my own wife, but but we always judge the worst. We don't pick their good things. We don't concentrate on their good things. We don't concentrate on them getting up and taking care of the baby, or getting up and fixing me a meal, or doing this or doing that.
Our negativity bias is
We need to concentrate on the positive.
Yeah.
We're always concentrating on
Do
the
you mean
negative.
in context of what our discussion that we need to be bringing people in and encouraging them to do right
them.
instead of saying, hey, you're doing that wrong and get out of here.
Yeah. Well, used to be, I'm a big sports fan, so it used to be, boy, if you had long hair and everything, playing basketball or something, no, you didn't do that. You had to cut your hair.
Yeah.
Yeah, or whatever. So, and
Ritualism.
yeah.
Yeah. No, that I understand. I understand. Absolutely. Who is it? It's Bryce.
Yeah, I think that we've allowed the culture to define what love is versus going back to what love truly is. If we are, love is not acceptance, love is love. Mm-hmm. And the problem with the contemporary church is that when they say love your neighbor, they're talking about accept them just as they are, but that's not true love. I don't let my kid run in the street because I love him. Yeah. I discipline him and tell him not to. Yeah. Just like I'm supposed to tell my brother in Christ that I love you. What you're doing is wrong. Yeah. I'm not going to accept what you're doing. I'm going to chastise you or correct you.
Yeah, that's a great insight. And I think that there's something to be said for two things there. A, you should definitely do it in love, obviously. And B, you are being loving by saying, I care about you enough to tell you the truth. I don't know who's lied to you, or maybe you've lied to yourself in this course of action, this life that you're living, or whatever the case may be, is destroying you. It's hurting you badly. And I love you enough to be able to be the one who tells you, hey man, you're hurting yourself. I'd love to see you get free of that, whatever it is. So yeah, you're absolutely right, Bryce. It's to bring to it is correct to bring to your brother's attention what is his stumbling block. Now we do have to be careful, especially that we don't have a log in our own eye when we're pointing out the splinter in our brother's eye. Does that mean, I've always asked myself, does that mean that Adam and Eve can never correct Cain and Abel and Seth because they're sinners? No, I don't believe so. Okay, a sinner can certainly correct a sinner, but hopefully not for the same sin that they themselves are committing, because therein is hypocrisy. If you are a male who struggles with lust, should you be counseling other males who struggle with lust? No, absolutely not. You are a hypocrite and you have no leg to stand on. If you're a male who has some sexual purity in your life, you're a good example and you should lead other males who might be struggling with lust. If you are a wife who has a bad relationship with her husband and has a bad attitude and I don't like serving this man, he's not treating me right and blah, 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 are you the person to go and marriage counsel other women? No, you are not. If you're a male who is just a paycheck, he ain't really leading his family. He's just working hard and giving them money. Well, if they can, and I'm sorry, don't think I'm throwing you under the bus, whoever you are out there. If they can replace you with a paycheck, you are not a father and a husband. You know what's interesting? Angela and I talked about this the other day. God is so concerned about widows and orphans. And I was like, man, we don't really have that many widows and orphans around us. But you know what she said to me? I wonder. We've got a society full of children who are raising themselves. Are they orphans? You bet they are. Even though their parents are alive, they're orphans. They have been left to rot and run amok with no correction, no guidance. Those are orphans. Okay, do we have widows? Yes, we do. Even though their husbands are still alive. They are not loving, they are not kind, they are not gentle, they are not leading their homes. All they're doing is working and saying, get me my food. Where's my food? Where's my clean clothes? I got no underwear. What's up? You ain't doing the laundry. That ain't a husband. You got yourself a widow, a spiritual widow, even though her husband is alive. I ask you to consider that. We do have widows and orphans and strangers among us. We just don't recognize them because we're blind. Guys, I think that the whole point of this message is we are returning exiles, and we are not holy and righteous and true, wrapped in our cloaks of Torah, thinking we got it all figured out. I don't want our Father to say, we're really expecting him to go, well done, good and faithful servant. And he's like, yeah, you tithed the dill and the cumin and the anise, but you neglected love and kindness and gentleness. Not being willy-nilly with your love and just permissive, but being concerned about each other. You were more concerned about yourself and how you were perceived religiously. And you did the easy stuff. You didn't do the hard stuff. You didn't make yourself available to your neighbor. Sorry, Stephen, I caught myself preaching there. Interrupt me, brother.
You're good. You're good. John chapter 13, verse 34, Jesus says, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this, all will know that you are my disciples, if you have love one for another.
Amen.
I think that'll put a nice cherry on top right there.
Amen. So let it be written. So let it be done. Lou, you get the last word, brother. I've kept you all long enough.
Similar to what he said, and we're to do it not like the Pharisees saying, "Oh gosh, I'm doing this," and we do it out of, like he said, love.
Absolutely, absolutely. I hope that this message has been challenging to you, but not too challenging. Know that I'm not kicking you. It may feel like a kick. I apologize. I want us to do better. I want me to do better. I want me to do better. You understand?
I'm just to let you know, I'm going to stop keeping Torah and I'm just going to start loving people.
You stop it, Stephen.
Then you're not keeping Torah.
No, you love your brother according to the Torah and you'll be doing all right. But yeah, let's get serious about making ourselves available and truly being concerned with each other. And please, this is my final word. I apologize. I promise. My wife said to me once, don't trip over the people at your feet looking for somebody to serve. Pay attention to your own house first. Right? There it is. Let us pray.